Hey everyone, it's Teresa Morrison, and welcome to our iBelieve Live. For today, I have an amazing guest. She is such a creative person. She is a speaker, a trainer, a writer. She's a blogger and has a podcast. She lives in Kerrville, Texas, with her husband, Stephen. And today we're going to talk about identity, wake up to who you are. And here is Kathleen. Hi, Kathleen. Welcome.
Oh, hi, Teresa. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. We're so excited to hear about identity statements, and they're just so important. Let's just dive in and let's just talk about identity before I get to the specific questions. I mean, how long have you been working on your identity statements or identity?
You know, I've been working on my identity really since the mid-1990s was when God first began to work on me in that area. And then I guess around 2010 or 11, I began working on identity statements. And really, I felt like I got the college level from what God had done in the mid-90s in my life.
That is so great. I mean, it's so important. I found that I started to know who I am in Christ. I started to walk more confidently. I was responding from my persona, how I'm known in heaven, versus reacting from the old person, from the old man. And so it's so important for us to just dive in to our identity.
Yeah, I think it has changed my life in so many ways. And I became a Christian when I was 10 years old, but it wasn't until I was in my mid-30s to late 30s that God really began to work on that. And little did I know how much I was going to need it in the days ahead.
Yeah, we want to hear a little bit about that. But first, why did you choose this title, Wake Up to Who You Are, for this interview?
Well, I have to tell you, I guess it started, like I said, in the mid-90s, and I one day just made the statement to my late husband. I said, "Who am I?" And because I just sold my business, and that's how everyone knew me in the community was Kathleen Maxwell Gymnastics, etc. And not long after that, God just said, you can't get your identity in your job, your husband, or your children. I mean, I couldn't wait to get married because then I thought, then I'll be somebody. I'll be Mrs. Joe Maxwell. And then I couldn't wait to be a mother. I kept yearning, to be somebody, not realizing that God had given me an identity. So that was I sold my business, and then I was like, oh my word, who am I now? Because I'd really got my identity in my work. And so I began to work on that and try to understand who I was and who God was calling me to be. And one of the first things that God showed me was from Psalm 8, in that scripture where it says that, what is man that you're mindful of him? You've made him a little lower than the angels and crowned him with glory and honor. And I read that passage one morning and I just felt God say, I've given you a crown, but you don't wear it.
Wow.
And I was just like speechless. I just said, Lord, I'm so sorry. Yeah. I'm so sorry. And that was back before the princess thing was big, like it is now for little girls. And it was like the Lord said, you're my daughter. You're my daughter. And because you're my daughter, I've given you a crown, but you don't wear it. And it made me sad that I had missed something. But quickly repented and said, Lord, teach me. And at that time I was teaching school. And Teresa, I'm a very down to earth, practical person. And I remember pretending, how would I walk different if I really had a crown on my head? And, what I noticed, how you walk kids in elementary school to lunch, to PE, to art, to all those things. So whenever I would lead my class, I would practice wearing my crown just subconsciously.
Yeah.
And as I would walk, my head was higher. I had more confidence. It really changed how I began to operate.
Yeah.
And so that teaching what God did in my life in that time, fast forward to 2003, 2004, I began teaching a group of women at the Christian Women's Job Corps, where I was a director there. And as I began to teach these women, one night I had a dream. In the dream, I was walking around, and there were all these people, and they were at this long table. And in my dream, I was going from one person to the next because they were all asleep. And I was waking them up, and I was waking them up. Wake up. You've got to wake up. You've got to wake up to who you are. And I go to the next person, and then the next person. And I woke up the next morning, and it was like just a light went on about how there were just so many in the body of Christ that did not know who they were and who they were called to be. And, one of the outstanding things in my life was going to Indonesia, where I gave that message at an international women's conference. And I took over 400 crowns for the women that I was speaking to. And in that teaching, which is on my podcast, my podcast, there's one of them called Wake Up to Who You Are. Each woman had that crown, and I had them put it at the end of the teaching on their heads. And 400 and something women wept, just weeping, because they understood who they were.
Wow. That's beautiful. Wow. That was in Indonesia?
Yes, in Bali, Indonesia.
How beautiful. I bet there was so many testimonies. They will never, ever forget that night. What a beautiful way to let them know how loved they are by God and how God sees them. He sees them as royalty in his eyes.
Yes.
That's so beautiful. So what are the benefits of understanding your identity and developing identity statements?
There's so many benefits. I would have to say that, number one, I think it can keep it, for me, they've kept me grounded in times in my life. Because I think I had listened to what other people had said. I had looked at my own failures. I had looked at the negative in my own life. I think sometimes we're our worst critics, and I didn't see myself the way God saw me.
Yeah.
And so in that time, it was just an awakening of truly beginning to understand in who I was and how that can keep us grounded on the tough days. Because there's always going to be things that knock us down.
Yeah.
We get a critique from our boss. Our spouse doesn't like the way we do something. Somebody criticizes us about something. And for me, those things were just devastating. I wouldn't really let them undo me. And so once I began to understand about who I was and develop some identity statements, which I'll talk about in a little bit, it really gave me something solid to walk on, so that when those things happened, I had something to go back to remind myself.
Yes.
I might have made a mistake, but I'm not a mistake.
That's right.
And this is who I am. So that's one of them. And I think just identity statements help us in those seasons of adversity. when we have just one thing after another that are big things, and we need something to ground us, something solid to stand on.
Yeah.
Something to remind us where we're going.
Exactly. And staying present future, we go back and we get healed, but we live in the present and we look towards the future, or we go back. Sometimes I go back to glean some of the gold that I missed along the way, some things that the Lord wanted to give me that perhaps I missed, and he brings it back around, and that's how good he is.
Yes.
But some people in this community may not know about identity statements or how to develop them. So what are some practical ways that we can develop identity statements, and how did you develop yours in your life?
It's been a process in my life, and I want to say, before I jump into that and give you some examples, I want to quote something from the book, Allison Bowen's book, The Image. I have to quote something because it goes along with the benefits. She says, and I'm going to read this, our response to situations is based in identity, God's, ours, and seeing true identity of others. Our responses are choices, no matter what is occurring, and we are responsible for the choices we make.
That's good.
And so, I think that my identity statements have helped me make better choices. They've kept me from what I call taking 5 minutes in the flesh and responding out of just the old man versus who I am. Yeah. And but some of the ways that I've personally developed them is, and I think this was maybe the hardest, what was spending time just listening to God, and having a time frame wherein I would just sit in the morning and just listen and say, Lord, here I am. What do you have to say to me?
Yeah.
Versus reading, praying, doing. But I think listening is key. The other night I was doing a teaching on this, and a woman came up afterwards, and she shared after the lesson the next week, she said, I've been a Christian for years, but I did what you said and sat and listened. And she said, God told me he loved me. And she was so excited, and you could just see the confidence rise up in her. So I think listening and just having time, just with your journal or with a pen and paper or note card, to just listen. What does he have to say? And out of that, I think some of my identity statements were developed. Reading about his character. I would read in, like, I know Psalm 103 talks about, the Lord is how he's kind, he's gracious, he's slow to anger, and rich in love. And then I would look at my own life and see where it measured up or where I needed. Some of them were things I needed to develop. And I would hear God say, that's in you. That's in you because you're my daughter.
Right.
But let's write a statement about you becoming that or more of that. So, and then different scriptures. I know I was reading in Joshua one time, and I just felt like God said, you're a Joshua. I've called you to lead people to a better place.
Yeah.
And I developed a statement out of that. Another one, it was funny. One of my favorite movies, this is kind of crazy, but it's Rush Hour. And I love Jackie Chan. And I thought, what did I love so much about it? I can watch that movie, and I've probably watched it, I don't even know how many times. And every time it's like the first time for me. But I thought what it is that I love about that movie is how trouble hits, you know, and he kind of rolls over it.
Yeah, he does.
And, you know, I had one thing after another. I had lost my husband to cancer. In 9 months, my life, he was diagnosed to when he died, there was 9 months to the day. And so my life was upside down. And right about that time was when God began to work with me on developing those identity statements. And I was like trying to figure out a whole new life. And then both of my parents were very ill. And so those identity statements kept me grounded. But one of my identity statements that came from that, and kind of the Jackie Chan part, was that I was an overcomer.
Yay.
You're an overcomer. You're like that. And I want you to live from the inside out. So one of my identity statements is I am an overcomer that lives from the inside out. And so when tough days would come, that's what I would remind myself of.
Yes.
And I think too, asking God, you know, who do you want to be for me in this situation? And seeing who he wanted to be for me uniquely helped me. And then I would listen to friends. It was like when God was working on something, or he was wanting me to work on a statement, the identity statement, it was like, it didn't matter who I ran into, they would say something. When I first started writing, I did not see myself at all as a writer. It was something that was birthed out of my late husband's death. I had been writing on his Kerrville site, and from that, the local newspaper asked me to write for them, just like I was writing on that site. And my first thing was, I'm not a writer. And the lady that asked me, she said, no, but you are. I was like, no, I don't like English. But you are. She saw something in me that I didn't see. And so I developed a statement, you know, that identity statement that said, I am a writer. And it was very hard for me to say those words, much less put them down.
Yeah.
But they've helped me to continue. And now I've done it for 10 years.
That's so good. And, you know, in 2020, I'm planning on bringing some courses to the iBelieve community. And one of them will be, you know, in identity and how to create identity statements and where to find those statements and how to, once you find them, how to write them down and then distill them into bullet points, because we need to remember in a pinch, like that Jackie Chan, something comes all of a sudden and we need to know and have those identity statements. No, this is who I am. No, this is what God has promised me. So that's coming in 2020. So I'm super excited to interview you today about identity, because it's so, like we said in the beginning, it's just so important, because there is an overall covering on us that we're children of God, that we're loved of God, that we're written on the palm of his hand, that we're ever before him, we're always on his mind. And then there are statements on how he sees us. So when he created us before the foundations of the world, what was on his heart? What was his emotion when he was creating us? What kind of joy came out of him? Because we're not cookie cutters. And so God sees us specifically. And that's what identity statements are. They are actually your I am statements. And they're so great in times of trouble, in times of sorrow, in times of battle, in times of joy, you know, and we continue to add to them and refine them and refine them. And it's just an ongoing list of bullet points that you're constantly refining and adding to. And God just so unfolds those for us. I remember when we were working on ours, 7 years ago, something like that, right? Or A long
Right.
time ago, we were working on ours, and look at how far they've been refined and tweaked, and we're not afraid to use that eraser and to go back and just reword something so that it's easily remembered. So,
Well, I think it's so crucial. And Teresa, it's like wherever I go, I just see God. I think it's all of us are needed in the kingdom. And it's to me, it's a season of all hands on deck. And I just did a teaching on this just last week. And I can't tell you how many people came up and said, I've heard identity. I've heard that word a lot lately. I heard that here. I heard that there. And so I think it's really big in the heart of God. And we've got to be secure in who he says we are. Something interesting I felt like the Lord showed me a few months ago is he said, you've outgrown your current identity. They're like clothes that don't fit anymore. New statement.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, yeah, because I had made the comment, I really feel stretched. I really feel stretched.
Yeah.
And I have 3 kids, and I know when they would outgrow their clothes, especially in that junior high age. One of my kids shot up 5 inches that year. In his jeans, I felt like all I did was buy jeans. He's 6'4" now. And it was like the Lord was saying, you need to update your identity statement. So I did for 2019. I wrote another one, which sounds, it is, I am a speaker, a powerful voice in God's kingdom, proclaiming truth that sets people free, unlocking new doors for them to walk through.
That's so good.
And little did I know when I developed that, just some of the things that were going to be coming ahead later in the year, the podcast, some of those things that when I was like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do this, I would get that back out. And I would remind myself,
this is who I am. This is who God says that I am. And truly, this is who I am. And sometimes with identity statements, it feels kind of strange in the beginning. Don't you think so? Like when the Lord says, this is how I see you, and you feel like, oh God, I don't want to sound prideful, or I don't want to sound like I am, I am this. And it's not like that, because you're just putting on these shoes and saying, wow, this really and truly is who I am, and I'm going to walk in it and take it out for a spin, whatever that might be. And I just wrote a couple of things that I wanted to share with the community regarding identity statements and where to find them. So here are some clues if you are interested and looking for your identity statement. Like I said, 2020, there will be some a course to take if you're interested. If you are interested, post below. So that'll make me work a little faster and get that together. But you would find those identity statements through prophetic words. So if you get a word, a prophetic word, just write it down, put it somewhere, and you might have that maybe in a journal or something like that. And that's the second place, would be like a journal. Reread your journal. Do you find any common themes there? Do you find any common scriptures, visions and dreams? So sometimes, God speaks to us in the night season. He speaks to us while we're asleep. And if there's any dreams that were really relevant, my dreams that I know that are from the Lord, they never leave me. It's like I remember them, and I write them down, and they're so vivid, right? And they have certain things about them, about the other night I was dreaming that I got like this sledgehammer, and I hit this lock, and the first time I hit it, it busted open. And so I'm like, oh, that's good, Lord. What does that mean? So then that's an invitation for me to look into what he's trying to say to me, So visions and dreams, prophetic words, journal, repeated insights from friends, that's what you were talking about. and characteristics from a Bible.
Sorry. My computer is linked. Oh, goodness.
That's okay.
My computer's linked to my phone. So sorry.
No. So, characteristics from a Bible hero. So for me, it was Joseph, Israel's son. But I just wanted to share one thing. You could even find an identity statement from your name. So my name means harvester. So I am true to the meaning of my name, Teresa, harvester, one who gathers. So that is a simple ID statement that just came from researching and looking and asking the Lord what my name means. And it means a harvester, one who gathers. And another one is a Bible warrior, which is JL. And she's the one that tagged the Syria with the tent peg, remember?
Right.
And so I am a woman who is fearless in battle as JL, bold and creative, annihilating the enemy, nailing him with my identity.
Wow, that's so good.
So yeah, I mean, just little things like that come. I read her story and I'm like, wow, everyone gives the credit to Deborah, but it was really God gave the enemy into the hands of JL. And
Yes.
she gave him a warm cup of milk, and then, she annihilated him because she was a warrior. So yeah, it's just so interesting how the Lord gives us little clues, and then we get that one little clue, and then we just start to talk to him and ask him questions. And you know what? I have found, and I'm sure you have, that the Lord wants us to know. He's not going to keep that information from us. He's going to lead us to the right journal. He's going to read us to the, we'll be reading the Bible, and then all of a sudden, that's a Bible hero. What is it about, like David? What is it about him that intrigues me? What is it about his character or something that he did? The same thing that you did with Jackie Chan. You ask yourself, what is it about him that I just really enjoy this character in this movie? I mean, God talks to us through so many things. And it was because of those things, the situations would come, and he would just jump over it, slide under it. He would and it was just, the enemy could never corner him.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's so cool. And Teresa, just to clarify for people, I have probably only in the last year, maybe year and a half, ever shared any of my statements with other people. I mean, these are statements, I think what I'd like to encourage the listeners, these are statements you develop, and they're between you and the Lord. They're like part of your battle plan whenever you're going through something or you need confidence in an area. And it's only been until recently that I've ever shared any of my statements with another person. They were just like private. But then I thought, well, as I would talk with people and help people, it was like I could see who they were.
Yeah.
And, then I would get a little bit braver and share these statements. And now I'm not, it's not that you go around, they're not in any way, like you said, boastful or proud. They're just, it's a statement that for me helps me stay grounded, stay in a solid place.
Yeah.
And is what God is saying, this is what I want you to become. This is how I want you to respond.
Yes.
In situations. And one of my identity statements is it's about being full of gratitude, kindness, gentleness, and love. And I can't sit here and tell you that 24/7 every day, that's what I'm like. But I do pull that statement out when I'm tempted to, react versus respond, and remind myself, but this is who God is, and this is who He's called me to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when I do, it just like settles my spirit.
It really does. And it's so funny that God will show people and give them the lens on how He sees you. So there's so many times that someone will say, you're this, I see you like this, or you're just so kind. You have the gift of mercy. You're just really a kind person. Yeah. And for you, it's like, really? But you take that and someone else says it, and then you'll say, okay, well, God has shown them that, so that I would know how to walk in kindness, to say, I am kind. Yeah. I am, and it's so funny that when I was interviewing William Paul Young, he was interviewed by Maria Shriver, and she said, at the end of the interview, she said, who are you? And this was like unscripted. He didn't know what kind of questions she was going to ask. And he leaned in and he said, I'm a child. I am pure. I am kind. I forgive easily. And that was those were his identity statements right off the bat, on a pinch, on live camera. And he just popped because he knows. And you know what? Underneath that kindness is a whole lot of story. As many stories when people weren't kind and you were kind, when people treated you impure and you gave them purity. And that's how you get authority in the spirit, is that when each identity statement carries weight in the spirit and the enemy knows that's who you are, and you've practiced it enough to gain weight in the spirit and authority to say, this is who I am. I am kind. I am gentle. I am patient. Yeah. I am pure in heart. I love people, and to have stories underneath that only the enemy and God knows. The things that you've done where no one has seen except God, and you are doing it for Him, and you are doing it because of who you are in Christ. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. And I think it governs so many things in our life. And for me, there was so much more to it. And I've loved the experience of developing throughout my life. And I can look back now because I have them on my computer. Yeah. And I have the very first one that God gave me, which I would say is the one that governs most of my life. Yeah. I'm a woman of significance and value, called to bring the supernatural power of God into broken lives.
That's so beautiful.
And that was birthed out of just me turning around kind of in a daze after my late husband was gone and saying, who am I now? Yeah. Who am I now, and how do I walk forward? And Lord, how do you want me to go? And that was where that one came from. And, it has given me an opportunity to comfort and help others that have gone through significant losses.
Right.
So I think there's so much to them. I was looking at, I think one of the things an identity statement does, I do a kickboxing class in my at my gym that I go to, and I have loved this class. I mean, we're not hitting or kicking anybody, but one of the things that our teacher always says is guard your face, guard your face. So you've got your hands up, like this in class. And it hit me one day. It's like, always saying guard our face, guard our face. Well, I've got a big body, there's a lot of other places. But it was like God said, but that's how somebody knows who you are, is your face. It's like your identity and how you're known. And, just the importance of, I think that's what an identity statement is it helps us guard who we really are.
Oh, that's good. That's so true. It helps us guard. That's what an identity statement really is. It guards who we are.
Who we are.
Oh, that's really good.
It does. And I can see that because, if you, I mean, this is graphic, but if you cut somebody's head off, how do you know who people are?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, unless you're a real forensic scientist or something, but that identifies.
Yeah.
It identifies it. And I think it's that same way. I think it's that same way in the spirit
Yeah.
too. I
So,
think.
what is something recent that the Lord has spoken to you about your identity? And that's one thing, guarding your faith
Yeah.
and guarding who you are. That's just such a great key.
Yeah. I'd have to say there was something in my journal. Just a second. Here it is. In my journal in April of this year. And it says, I felt like, the Lord said, the identity statements I've given you authorize and give you authority to walk in those areas. These are your job description, your heavenly orders to establish and bring heaven to earth. And then I felt like he said, prepare for greater visibility. And that was before some other things came, up, the podcast. And even when you asked me about doing the interview, I thought, oh, I've never done anything like that. I can't do that. I mean, there's a lot of other people she could ask. And yet I had that written down. So I knew that it was something God wanted me to step into. And that's another thing my identity statements have done, is they've helped me to know what to say yes to and what to say no to.
Yeah.
But I think just that, that when the Lord said, these are what I've authorized you to do, so go.
Yeah.
And just like a policeman has a badge because it authorizes him to stop me if I'm speeding, or the game warden has a badge.
Yeah.
Or when I'm hunting, they have all authority
Yes.
to see what, see what I've shot, to see my license. And I think that's what identity statements do, or they've done in my life, is they've given me an authority.
Absolutely. And I love, if you listen to Graham Cook's teachings, he talks about identity a lot. And part of that is, just seeing ourselves as heaven does. He talks about persona, how we're known in heaven. So in Hebrews, it talks about that we have a cloud of witnesses. Well, what do they see? Because they can see through the eyes of Jesus. They don't see bad. How do they see me? How does Jesus see me? If Jesus were to describe me, what would he say?
Yeah.
And then we have, again, that overall covering, but the specifics of who Kathleen is. When I created her, I was filled with joy. I was creating her into a leader that would free people into who they truly are. I mean, just on and on. He just loves to speak over us who we are, and at the same time, we live in a world where a lot of times the world is speaking the opposite,
Right.
And who are we going to agree with? We need to agree with and align with how God sees us so that we can step into that. And then life is our practice ground where we get to practice. And there's lots to practice in the fruits of the Spirit alone, but practice who we are. Yeah. And how God sees us and our identity statements.
Yeah.
And we know where we are, and I need to grow in this area, and just really take a good look at ourselves and say, God, I really, really want to know how you see me. Show me how you see me. Holy Spirit, you're so amazing. Lead me to the places where I've written that down. Lead me to voices where I could hear repetition, that I could hear that I'm kind and merciful, or however you see me. Show me when I'm reading the Bible the characteristics of something that just I could resonate with the story of Joseph, Israel's son.
Yeah.
You know, what is it about him that really intrigues me? Those are the kind of things that rise up from the inside. And we need to be curious and hungry enough to go after those things. And how better than to keep a list and just go back over it. I can't tell you how many times at first, when I first wrote like 1 or 2 identity statements, I'd go back and make it a little bit more so I could, you know, refining it and making it shorter and shorter so that it's a striking bullet point in the spirit.
Right.
Something that I say that. And I'm sure, you know, the Lord is saying, she's got it. She's got it. Let me give you more. Practice what I've given you. Practice what I'm giving you, and I will give you more because I want you to know how I see you. I want you to know how you are fully loved, because perfect love in this life casts out fear. It pushes fear out. And when we know who we are, that we know when we're perfectly loved, then it's going to push out fear. Fear is always an indicator on where we're not perfectly loved. It's like, enemy, you're such a dead giveaway. Because every time I feel fear, my next question is, God, oh my gosh, you want to love me in this area, don't you? That's an invitation to love me, because I'm not perfectly loved in this area because I feel fear. So the enemy doesn't want to bring me fear because I'm always wanting to be perfectly loved. It's such a place where he puts his finger.
Right.
And God says, I want to expand that in you. And it's so beautiful. So we reverse things that the enemy brings. It's like everything he tries ends up being a boomerang right back to you. You're fearful. You're this. That's not me. I know who I am. I'm well loved. I'm perfectly loved. So yeah, I think that this is a common thread in the kingdom of God, that God wants us, men and women and children, to know who we are and use our everyday life as a training ground to practice and to step into those shoes and who we are.
You know, I have a fabulous testimony, Teresa, about something that happened that just came to mind when you were talking. And years ago, I had a situation at work, and there was this coworker that I was working out of town, and this coworker that had really come against me. She was going through some things and had made some accusations that weren't true, but it crushed me that happened. And I went to a couple that I trusted and just told them about the situation, to have them pray with me and all. And one of the first things the gentleman said is, he said, but that's not who you are. He said, you've just forgotten who you are. And he said, you need to ask God to remind you who you are. And when he said that, a light bulb went on. He said, this is who I see you as. I had, now mind you, never shared any of my identity statements with anybody. And as he said those several things, I thought, I've got identity statements on those. He goes, you've got what? I said, no, I have that written down. He said, well, you need to get them out and use them.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about it, but I did. I took those in a matter of months, all of this stuff came to light. And, this woman was let go from the company. And it was so cool, because as I just in my spirit, it was responding in a right way, and trusted God to vindicate and turn it around. He did it just like that. And he did it much better than I could have ever asked.
That is so, so good. That is such a great testimony. And really quick before we close, when I started to create my identity statement, my husband, I said, you need to create yours, because how I see you, I want to know how God sees you through you. Only you could write those down, and so, I gave him my identity statement and he gave me his. And it's like, you know, if I act outside of who I am, call me up, remind me who I am. Remind me, Teresa, that's not who you are. You're a woman of faith. Just start to speak my identity over me to remind me. And it's calling me up and reminding me of who I am in Christ. And it's great to partner with a spouse, a friend, a group of people that you all get your identity statements out and you're able to say, hey, this is what's going on in life. And then the friend could remind you, hey, don't you have an identity statement that says this, this, and that, you know? And it's just a really great way because we need to be reminded. We need to have those people to remind us who we are in Christ. And so it's such a rich journey.
Yes, it really is. And I think I think the whole key though in identity statements, it's Lord just wants relationship with us. He wants that communication with us. He wants us to partner with him and practice.
Absolutely.
And it takes all the performance out of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's really a stepping into who you truly are and how God truly sees you. You're not pretending like something you're not. You are in alignment with how he sees you, and that is the most beautiful thing. So thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it's such a great thing to talk about identity. Like you said, a lot of people in the kingdom are hearing that identity, but they really don't know exactly, you know, what that means. They probably have never heard of identity statements in the community, maybe not. But it's so great to hear your perspective and your experience with God and creating yours and stepping into who you truly are, Kathleen. You're such a blessing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, Teresa, too, if anybody's interested, I have 3 podcasts about identity.
Mm-hmm.
And the podcast is my name all together, Kathleen Maxwell-Rambie.podbean.com, and it's also on Apple Podcast.
Okay. So if you can post those links below,
okay,
that would be great.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks everyone, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I mean, it's so great. So when we talk about identity, we've broken it down a little bit with just talking to Kathleen. And if you have any questions, just post them below. And thanks for inviting us into your homes tonight. Bye.